My name is Elena Hart, and if you had asked me 2 years ago what heartbreak felt like, I would have shrugged and given you a cliché I stole from a rom-com. Words like gut punch or shattered glass always sounded exaggerated to me, as though heartbreak was more of a poetic invention than an actual human condition. But now, sitting here in a coffee shop in Portland, watching the orange September rain smear down the glass window and blur the streetlights, I know the weight of it too personally. Before we jump into today's story, drop a quick comment, tell me your name, where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Alright, let's get into the story. I am 28 years old. I grew up in Ohio, studied literature in New York, and eventually migrated west after graduate school, chasing greener landscapes and air that didn't taste like subway metal. I work as a freelance editor, which means my life is half spent with manuscripts, red pens, and the freedom to escape my desk whenever I please. That freedom, ironically, is also the same leash that dragged me deep into the maze of loving and losing. Because freedom means I could follow him anywhere. And I did. His name was Adrian. His presence is still a phantom orbiting my every thought. Broad-shouldered, painfully sincere, with hands made for building things, furniture, campsites, even futures with me, I loved him like I believed in permanence. We planned endless road trips, spoke of cabins we'd one day own in Vermont or Maine, and I let myself imagine children in hazy daydreams. But plans are delicate creatures. They fray when one person stops feeding them. Last spring, Adrian left. Not with cruelty, not with visible lies, just with a subtle pulling away I chose to ignore until it was too late. He said he wanted space, a colder word than silence, because silence at least is empty, while space is endless. I watched him go, fingers trembling against the doorframe, and part of me believed he would circle back. Like boomerangs do in myth. Like promises do when they're real. But then came the photo. It appeared 2 months later on my phone, dropped into my lap by an old college friend who thought I should know. The image was simple, Adrian, at a coastal resort in California, smiling under the palm trees with someone new. A woman. Young, soft-eyed, leaning on his arm like I once leaned. They were on vacation. Together. And while Instagram filters attempted to soften the truth, each pixel screamed at me, "He has replaced you." That was when the spiral began. There's no logical sequence to heartbreak. It doesn't obey time or reason. 1 hour I was strong, swearing at the sky, telling myself I deserved better. The next, I was on the floor, hugging my knees, replaying every tiny failure. Should I have been lighter, quieter, more mysterious, less demanding? Why wasn't I enough? My brain became a courtroom where I was both guilty and unrepresented. Everywhere I looked, reminders blistered me. His old t-shirt in my laundry basket. The dent in the couch where he liked to nap. The smell of cedar chips from the hiking bag we'd half unpacked on returning from road trips. And worst of all, the hollow ache in my chest when I reached for my phone and realized there was no longer anyone waiting at the other end. I tried distractions. Burying myself in work. Jogging by the river until my lungs burned. Drinking wine with girlfriends who spoke in urgent reassurances. You'll heal, Elena. This is temporary. You're stronger than him. But strength does not visit simply because it is invited. And then came a late-night message that startled me out of my inertia. It was from Zoe, one of my closest friends since college, who had moved to Chicago for her law career. Her text was short. Come visit me next month. Change of scenery. You need it. At first, I resisted. The thought of airports, crowds, and pretending to smile exhausts a person mid-heartbreak. But something about Zoe's insistence carried gravity. She knew me well, knew that solitude, though comforting in doses, could also become a cavern where despair multiplies. So I booked the ticket. Chicago in October. High winds, new skyline, new distractions. But the story does not really begin with Chicago. It begins with the decision I made while staring at that plane ticket confirmation email. A decision so quiet I nearly didn't notice it until it started to reshape me. The decision. I will not let this break me. Not Adrian. Not the new woman. Not the Instagram photos designed to flaunt his newfound joy. If love could collapse around me like scaffolding, then so could I rebuild something sturdier. Something not tethered to another person's willingness to stay. That was the promise I made to myself. Yet promises to oneself are fragile things. They require practice. A few days after that resolution, I found myself scrolling once more through his posts, punishing myself with digital knives. The most recent picture made me freeze. He was by Lake Tahoe this time, his arm woven around the new girl's shoulders as though she had always been there. The caption was obscenely cheerful, exploring new horizons with the best company. Something inside me snapped, not into despair, but into anger. Not at her. Not wholly at him, but at myself. For weeks I had surrendered control, living like the abandoned character in my own story instead of the narrator. Grief is valid, yes. But I realized in that moment that grief had become my oxygen, and I was suffocating inside it. So I did something impulsive. I closed the app. I opened a blank journal. And I began writing not about him, but about me. What I wanted. What I'd lost. What I still had. Each word came like a step out of a burning house. By the time dawn cracked through the window, my hand ached, but the fog inside me felt thinner. That night, I wrote the line that would anchor me for months. My story is not the story of being left. My story is what I choose to become after being left. This is where the shift truly began. The trip to Chicago would bring further revelations, unexpected meetings, and a confrontation with the version of myself I had abandoned in Adrian's shadow. But before I continue, I want to pause on this part of the story, because heartbreak, as I've learned, deserves to be narrated not just as tragedy, but as transformation. The plane descended into Chicago with a metallic groan, and as I pressed my forehead to the cold window, the city stretched out below like a puzzle of steel and glass. October sunlight glinted off the lake, but the waves churned in restless whitecaps. True to its name, the windy city carried a sharp breath that slapped me awake the moment I stepped outside O'Hare. Zoe was waiting at the arrival's gate, waving wildly like someone had just won a lottery prize. She wore a long navy coat, her curls pulled into a messy bun, and in her hand dangled 2 paper cups of coffee. That was Zoe, always showing up with caffeine and enthusiasm in equal measure. "Elena Hart, in the flesh," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug so forceful my ribs protested. For a moment, her warmth cracked the shell I had worn these past weeks. The cab ride to her apartment on the north side was filled with chatter. Zoe, true to form, narrated every landmark as if auditioning for a city tour guide job: Wrigley Field, the glitter of Michigan Avenue, the stretch of Navy Pier in the distance. I only half listened at first, my eyes drawn instead to the crowds thrumming on the sidewalks, bundled in sweaters and scarves. Everyone seemed in motion. Alive. Her apartment was a sunlit third-story loft with creaky wooden floors and walls crawling with bookshelves. She had cleared a space for me, complete with fresh sheets and, because she knew me too well, a notebook left on the pillow. "You're going to write it out, aren't you?" Zoe said knowingly, watching me lift the notebook. "I'm trying," I admitted. "You'll do more than try. This city has a way of rattling you out of your comfort zone." That evening, Zoe insisted we go out for dinner. "No wallowing in pajamas on your first night," she declared, digging through my suitcase to veto my plainest shirts. In the end, I stepped into the crisp air wearing a borrowed emerald scarf and a hesitant smile. We walked to a buzzing restaurant near Andersonville, warm lights dripping from the ceiling, the scent of rosemary and seared meat filling the air. The chatter of strangers wrapped around me, comforting in its anonymity. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel observed by the ghost of my breakup. As the evening stretched, Zoe introduced me to some of her colleagues who joined at the table, a mix of lawyers and researchers with quick wit and sharper stories. I laughed at jokes, sipped too much wine, and even caught myself enjoying the music weaving through the room. And then, almost like an unwanted echo, my phone buzzed. Reflexively, I glanced at the illuminated screen. Adrian's face wasn't there, but his shadow was. An old photo notification, one I had forgotten was stored, to remind me of what I had lost. I shoved the phone back into my coat pocket, determined not to let it claim the night. Over dessert, Zoe leaned close and whispered, "You're doing better than you think." I can almost see your old self. What old self? I asked, genuinely uncertain. The Elena who isn't defined by someone else's presence or absence. The Elena who takes up her own space. Her words lingered. Back at her apartment, curled under a knit blanket, I thought about that version of myself. Was she still alive beneath the grief? Could I reach her again? I decided I would try. The following morning, Zoe left early for court hearings, leaving me with a spare key and instructions to go explore or at least breathe some fresh air. I obeyed reluctantly, tugging my jacket tighter against the brisk October wind. The lakefront trail unraveled before me, golden leaves scattering like applause as runners' footsteps echoed on the pavement. The lake was an ocean in disguise, heaving against the stone barriers. I paused often, sometimes to scribble notes in my journal, sometimes to simply exist as water blurred into sky. It was there, standing at the edge of Lake Michigan with the waves spraying cold mist onto my cheeks, that something shifted. The horizon looked endless, but not in the punishing way Adrian's space had once felt. This vastness looked inviting. If life was endless space, then maybe it wasn't abandonment after all, it was possibility. I whispered out loud, to no one but the gulls overhead, I am still whole. Later that day, I ducked into a cozy bookstore cafe on Clark Street, partly to escape the wind, partly to satisfy my relentless craving for chai. The cafe was a hybrid kind, stacks of novels nestled beside teacups, people sipping lattes while thumbing through poetry. It was the sort of place I had once fantasized about opening with Adrian, before plans dissolved. I wandered toward the fiction section, my fingers grazing spines, and that's when a man's voice interrupted. Careful, with enough books like that, you'll start editing titles instead of reading them. I turned, startled. He was tall, with sandy hair tucked beneath a wool cap, carrying 3 hefty books under one arm. The kind of stranger who seemed unintentionally disarming, his presence gentle rather than invasive. Editors have it, I replied cautiously, clutching a random novel. Editor. That explains the look. What look? The one that scans words like they've personally offended you. He grinned, holding out a hand. I'm Liam. I hesitated, then shook it. His hand was warm, steady, unlike the tremor that still sometimes haunted me. We exchanged small talk, the sort that exists somewhere between politeness and genuine intrigue. Liam was a graphic novelist, based partly in Chicago, partly in Portland, of all coincidences. The universe, it seemed, enjoyed weaving threads across maps. When Zoe texted half an hour later to summon me for dinner, I realized I had spent far longer in conversation than planned. As Liam and I parted, he tapped his books meaningfully. Stories heal. Don't forget that. His words burrowed deep, residing somewhere near the promise I had made weeks earlier. That night, Zoe grilled me with suspicious curiosity. You look lighter. Something happened. I recounted the bookstore encounter with deliberate nonchalance, but Zoe's grin widened mischievously. See? The city delivers. You're already meeting strangers who remind you what's possible. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't smother the small smile tugging at my lips. My second day in Chicago closed with me journaling late into the night by Zoe's living room lamp. Words flowed freer now, not about Adrian, but about me. About city skylines, laughter at crowded tables, waves crashing against stone, voices that belonged to people I hadn't yet fully known, but who entered my life like lanterns. Instead of spirals, I felt beginnings. Chicago had begun to work on me. Every morning, the city's noise and sharp winds shook me awake from the fog I had carried for months. Each day, I felt a little more like someone in motion, someone stepping away from the ruins of a relationship into something uncertain but alive. And yet, grief is not a straight line. It coils back on itself, unpredictable. I learned this the hard way on a Friday morning, exactly 1 week into my stay, when I opened my email. His name leaped off the screen before I even processed the subject line, checking in. That was it. 2 words, deceptively harmless, sitting above a tide of chaos. My pulse roared louder than the traffic on the street below as I clicked it open. Hey, Elena. I hope you're doing okay. I know it's been a while and maybe I don't have the right to reach out, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about you. I miss our conversations. Maybe when I'm back in Portland, we can grab coffee. No pressure. Just wanted to see how you were. The words dragged me backward into the spiral I thought I had escaped. He missed me? He wanted coffee? What did that mean for the girl in the photos, for the vacations and smiles? I could almost hear his voice in those lines, gentle, thoughtful, as if he were unaware of how thoroughly he had unmade me. I sat frozen for a long while, staring at the glow of the screen until my reflection blurred with the words. My coffee turned cold. My chest tightened in that old, familiar choke of longing and disbelief. Part of me wanted to reply instantly, to run back to the comfort of almost love, to pretend the months of absence hadn't happened. But another part of me, the part born by Lake Michigan, the part writing nightly into my journal, resisted. I didn't reply. Not then. Not yet. Instead, I buried the phone under the pillow as though distance from the device meant distance from him. That afternoon, unable to sit still with my thoughts, I returned to the bookstore cafe. It felt like neutral ground, halfway between nostalgia and new beginnings. As luck would have it, Liam was there again, perched at a table near the window with a stack of sketches spread before him. You again, he said, smiling as though we had planned the encounter. Chicago isn't small, you know, I replied, though I secretly felt relief wash through me. He pushed a mug toward me, an extra order, steaming, fragrant with cinnamon. I had a feeling you'd show up. I took the chai and let the warmth ground me. He didn't ask how I was, or why my eyes looked raw, or what ghosts trailed behind me. He simply began talking about his work, a graphic novel he was illustrating about storms, both literal and metaphorical. There was something in the way he spoke, unhurried, respectful of silences, that anchored me. I found myself opening up in return, just a little. Not about Adrian, not directly, but about writing, about grief, about how sometimes words betrayed us when we most needed them. You don't owe your pain to anyone, Liam said at one point, sketching absent-minded lines. People think healing means explaining. It doesn't. It just means relearning how to breathe without choking. I stared at him, absorbing the quiet truth of his words. That evening, Zoe and I cooked pasta together in her kitchen, steam fogging the windows as the scent of garlic and tomatoes wrapped around us. At some point, I told her about Adrian's email. Her spoon clattered against the pot. Are you serious? Elena, no. No. Don't go backward. I didn't reply. Zoe narrowed her eyes. But you thought about it. Of course I did. My voice cracked. How could I not, after everything? She softened, reaching across the counter to squeeze my hand. I know it's tempting. But you need to ask yourself, do you want him back, or do you just want the version of yourself you thought you were when you were with him? Her words landed hard. All night, I lay awake turning them over. Which was it? Him or me? In that restless haze, I returned to my notebook. Page after page spilled with contradictions, my longing for Adrian, my fury at his carelessness, my fragile new self I'd begun nurturing here in Chicago. Midnight passed. The city outside throbbed with traffic and laughter, but I sat hunched by the window, pen scrawling sentences half legible, half prayers. Finally, one line steadied me. If I go back, I will lose myself again. If I keep moving, I might discover who I was always meant to be. I closed the notebook with trembling hands. The next day, perhaps sensing I needed air, Liam invited me to join him for a neighborhood street art tour. It was casual, spontaneous, and something the Elena who used to wait for Adrian to plan everything, would never have done. We wandered through alleys splashed with murals, phoenixes reborn in fiery reds, faces of women painted across brick walls with haunting intensity, phrases scrawled in giant letters. We are more than what we lose. I froze in front of that last mural. My chest tightened, but not with grief, with recognition. Liam noticed. He didn't press, just said softly, sometimes strangers paint the words we're too afraid to write ourselves. We ended the walk at a little taco stand, shoulder to shoulder on a cracked sidewalk eating food out of paper trays. I laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, when salsa dripped onto my scarf. It felt like a declaration, life goes on, even messy. That night, alone with my journal again, I realized something important. Adrian's email, though painful, had given me clarity. His voice no longer dictated my world. I still had scars, yes, still battled urges to respond, but I was not only responding to him. I was responding to me. Liam was not a replacement. Zoe was not a savior. Chicago was not a cure. But together, they were the scaffolding helping me rebuild. And for the first time since my world collapsed, I sensed the faint outline of a stronger structure taking shape. By the second week in Chicago, I felt as though the city had wrapped me in its rhythm. Brick buildings with ivy clinging stubbornly, trains rattling overhead, wind sweeping around corners like a playful enemy. I had begun to see myself differently, not the abandoned girl frozen in time, but a woman walking toward something unknown. But closures rarely come gently. They come jagged, messy, at the moment you least expect. On a gray Saturday morning, I woke early, restless. The email from Adrian still sat in my inbox, bold and unanswered. For days I had avoided it, but ignoring it now felt like surrendering power. Replying, however, felt dangerous, like reopening a wound that had just begun to knit. Finally, notebook open before me, I drafted words I wasn't sure I would send. Adrian, thank you for reaching out. I need to be honest, I am not in a place where grabbing coffee would help me heal. I hope life gives you what you're looking for, but I can't be part of it anymore. Take care. My fingers trembled as I typed the final line. It wasn't bitter, wasn't dramatic, just final. A line drawn in firm but compassionate ink. After rereading it half a dozen times, I hit send. No fireworks. No collapsing ceilings. Just silence. And in that silence, freedom. That afternoon, Zoe insisted we go donate clothes at a shelter. I brought along some old sweaters I'd carried uselessly since the breakup. Buried in the bottom of my suitcase was Adrian's t-shirt, the one I had clung to like an anchor during sleepless nights. I folded it neatly, placed it into the donation bin, and let my hands linger for only a second. Then released. On the walk back, lungs stung by icy air, I realized how much lighter I felt. Not entirely healed, not yet, but less burdened. As if I'd set down a backpack I never should have agreed to carry. 2 days later, Liam invited me to a small gallery showcasing local artists. He had contributed sketches from his graphic novel project, and his nervousness made me smile. The gallery was warm with light and possibility. Canvases lined the walls, brushstrokes shouting emotions and color. One corner held Liam's panels, storm clouds twisting into human forms, lightning that cracked open hidden figures, rain falling onto roots that stubbornly held. You made pain beautiful, I told him quietly, standing beside the display. He glanced at me, eyes full of something unspoken. Not beautiful. Just honest. Sometimes honesty looks like beauty when we let it. The words sank deep. Maybe my own writing, my nightly bleeding onto notebook pages, was not weakness, but its own form of beauty. Maybe storytelling was survival. I spent hours at that gallery, letting art breathe into spaces where grief once suffocated. By the time we left, I felt a certainty blooming. I did not want to merely survive Adrian's absence. I wanted to thrive in my own presence. Toward the end of my trip, Zoe and I walked downtown one last time before my flight. The city glowed with autumn decadence, lights reflecting off wet pavement, pumpkins stacked in storefronts. You're different, Zoe said abruptly, linking her arm with mine. How so? You walk like someone carrying herself, not waiting to be carried. Her words cracked something open inside me. Tears surprised me, hot against the cool wind. Thank you, I whispered, for being here when I couldn't be with myself. Zoe smiled, squeezing my arm. That's what friends do. But the rest you did yourself. When the plane wheels touched down back in Portland, dread didn't claw at me like I had feared. Instead, I felt a quiet strength simmering beneath my ribs. The streets were the same, my small apartment unchanged, but I was not. The first thing I did was pin a page from my journal onto the fridge. The line read, "My story is not what ended. My story is what I choose to build." Weeks passed. Adrian never replied to my email. At first, the silence stung, proof that my chapter in his life had closed without ceremony. But soon, I recognized it as a gift. His absence left room for my presence. I filled that room with small rituals, morning runs by the river, evenings with manuscripts, late nights lost in writing stories of women who refused to collapse under sorrow. Zoe and I had standing Sunday calls. Liam and I exchanged emails now and then, not romantic, not yet, but threaded with warmth and possibility. One evening, walking along Portland's streets dusted with winter's first chill, I glanced at the horizon and realized something pivotal. I was not defined by who I had loved or who had left me. I was defined by what I chose after loss, by the fact that I kept choosing. And so, even with scars, even with memory lingering like smoke, I stepped forward into the widening horizon. Stronger. Freer. Myself.